Objective 2. Construct frequency polygons. We can use frequency polygons to summarize quantitative data graphically. They provide the same information as histograms. A frequency polygon is a graph that uses points connected by line segments to represent the frequencies for the classes. It is constructed by plotting a point above each class midpoint, the sum of the consecutive lower class limits divided by 2 on a horizontal axis at a height equal to the frequency of the class. So for example, constructing a frequency polygon. We're going to draw a frequency polygon of the 5-year rate of return data listed in the table below. So this is what we've done in our previous example. Okay, and so if you take a look here, we create a table, and so this table has a column that says class 5-year rate of return, which we've already done. We want to find the class midpoint, what is the frequency, and the relative frequency. What we do is we begin by calculating the class midpoints of each class. The class midpoint is found by adding consecutive lower class limits and then dividing the result by 2. So again, the class midpoints is found by adding consecutive lower class limits and dividing the result by 2. So I want you to take a look here. Okay, so we're going to look at the class midpoints. Okay, so we're looking at the consecutive lower class limits. So we have 8 and then we have 9. And if we add those two and then divide that by 2, we get a midpoint of 8.5. And now keep in mind that the frequency for that class is 2 and the relative frequency is 0.05. Now next, if we take a look at the next two lower class limits, which are 9 and 10, so 9 plus 10 divided by 2 gives us 9.5. Okay, and then we would do the same thing. Okay, you can see here that if we take 10 and add 11 and then divide it by 2, we get 10.5. Okay, likewise, if we take 11, add 12, and divide it by 2, then that gives us 11.5. Okay, so if we continue that all the way along here, we're going to go ahead and, again, we're going to add 10 and 11 to get and divide that by 2 to give us 10.5. And then we're going to add 11 plus 12, divide that by 2 to give us 11.5. And then 12 plus 13 and divide that by 2 to give us 12.5. 13 plus 14 divided by 2 to give us 13.5. And then 14 plus 15 to give us divide that by 2 to give us 14.5. Okay, 15 plus 16 divided by 2 gives us 15.5. And then 16 plus 17 divided by 2 gives us 16.5. 17 plus 18 divided by 2 gives us 17.5. And then 18 plus 19 divided by 2 gives us 18.5. Okay, now we need to figure out, okay, what makes our last, how do we get the one before and the one after? So what we would do, okay, is in order to get this next one here, this 19.5, well, the next one would be 20. So that means we would take 19 plus 20, divide that by 2 to give us the 19.5. And likewise, what would be the one before the 8? Okay, then that would be 7, which would go to 7.99. Same thing here, this would go to 20.99. Okay, so when we have our 7 up here for our lower class limit, then we're going to add the next lower class limit, which is 8, and then we would divide that by 2, and then that would give us 7.5. So now what we have is we have the class midpoints. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to then look at the 5-year rate of return. So then our horizontal axis, okay, is going to consist of the midpoints. So if you take a look here, it starts at 7.5. Okay, there's 0, 7.5, and it goes all the way to 20.5, which is the next one, which means that if we would go from, let's say, 21 to 21.99, So if we added 20 plus 21 and then divide that by 2, then that would give us 20.5. So what that means is we're going to create our midpoints, which is 7.5 all the way to 20.5. Okay, so up here it says we're going to plot the points above each class midpoint at a height equal to the frequency of the class. And then we're going to draw line segments connecting those points. And then you draw 2 additional line segments connecting each end of the graph with the horizontal axis. Now again, remember to label your axes and title your graph. Well, we know the title is 5-year rate return. We know that down here we have our horizontal axis with midpoints, and this is the 5-year, okay, rate of return in percentage. Okay, and now we also need to look at our vertical axis. So our vertical axis, okay, is the frequency, which goes from 0 to 14. So if you notice here, the frequency goes from 0 to 14. Okay, and then what we're going to do is now we're going to plot our points according to our midpoints. So if we take a look at the midpoint of 7.5, we know that it has a frequency of 0. So that means when we come down here, we're going to plot a point at 7.5 where it represents 0. Okay, and then if we look at 8.5, we're going to plot a point at 2 for the frequency. So that means we're going to go ahead and then plot a point here at 2 above the 8.5. Okay, and then if we take a look at the midpoint of 9.5, that's going to give us 2. So for 9.5, that is going to give us 2 there. For 10.5, the frequency is 4. So above the midpoint for 10.5, we have the frequency of 4. Okay, for the midpoint 11.5, we have a frequency of 1. So for 11.5, we have a frequency of 1. Okay, for 12.5, we have a frequency of 6. So for 12.5, we're going to come all the way up here at 6. Okay, and then for 13.5, we have 13. So for 13.5, we know that we have 13 here. For 14.5, we have 7. Okay, for 15.5, we have 3. For 16.5, we have 1. For 17.5, we have 0. For 18.5, we have 0. For 19.5, we have 1. And then for 20.5, we're going to have 0. Okay? And so, again, going over here, now that the class midpoints of each class are shown in the table, we're going to plot the points with the class midpoints as the x-coordinates and the frequencies of the y-coordinates, which we've done. And now we're going to connect these points with line segments. And then determine the midpoint of the class preceding the first class, which we did, which is 7.5. And the midpoint of the class after last class, which is 7.5. And then we're going to connect each end of the graph with the horizontal axis, starting at 7.50 and 20.50, respectively, to create this graph. Okay? Alright, so let's take a look here. So now we have a line from here to here, and then it's going to go from here, and then to that point, and then to this point, and then there, and from there to there. And we have our connecting our points to create our time series graph. Let me go ahead and redo this one here, since this is at the bottom there, connecting from there to there, and then there. And so therefore, this represents our graph. Okay, now let's go ahead and use StatCrunch. Okay, so if we want to construct frequency and relative frequency polygons, we want to enter class midpoints in variable 1 and frequency or relative frequency in variable 2. And then we title the columns. So let's take a look here. We're going to go in here and then we're going to type in our information into StatCrunch. Okay, so here's StatCrunch, and so we're going to look at the class midpoints. So we're going to call this column midpoints. Okay, and then we're going to enter in the midpoints, starting with 7.5, because 7.5 was the beginning one. And then we're going to put in 8.5, and then go all the way down to 20.5. So we have 8.5, 9.5, 10.5, and if you notice, I'm going all the way down to 20.5 because we want to make sure that we put in both the ends, okay? Now remember the frequency for 7.5, and we're going to title this as frequency, okay, was 0. And then we have 2, 2, and then 4, and then 1. We have 6, 13, 7, 3, 1, 0, 0, 1, and then 0. So there's our frequency. And let's just put in relative frequency, even though we didn't do that one by hand, but we can at least see what it is like in StatCrunch. So we got 0.05, 0.05, 0.10. We're going to round this to 2 decimal places, so 0.03, 0.15, 0.33, 0.18, 0.08. Okay, and I think I made a mistake there. So we need to shift this down just a little bit. So we're going to have to start with this being 0, and then 0.05, and then 0.05, and then 0.10, 0.03, 0.15, and 0.33, 0.18, okay, 0.08, 0.03, 0, 0, 0.03, and then 0. Okay, so now what we want to do is now create, now that we've created our columns, what we want to be able to do is now we want to be able to generate a time series graph. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to make sure that we have our midpoints, okay, and then now we're going to select graph, and then we're going to go to scatter plot, which is here. Okay, in the x variable, okay, we're going to call that the midpoints because that has to be along the x-axis. In the y variable, we're going to use the frequency to do the frequency one first. Okay, and then down at the bottom, okay, here where it says display, we want to display points and lines. We want to hit the control button. And then we're going to label this. So we can label this as the x-axis is the 5-year, okay, rate of return, and that is in a percentage. Okay, and then the y value is going to be the frequency. Okay, and so now we're going to go ahead and then select compute. And so now we have our time series graph that should resemble the one that we did by hand. Okay, so this is for the frequency graph. And now let's take a look at how we would do that for the relative frequency. So we can go back here and then hit options and select edit. And then we're going to use midpoints for the x variable still. And now we're going to choose the relative frequency column. Okay, and then we're going to come down here. We're going to make sure that points and lines are highlighted. Okay, and then the thing that we need to change here is the title to make sure the y-axis says relative frequency. So now let's go ahead and graph that. And now you can see that this represents our relative frequency graph. And so there, this represents our relative frequency graph using StatCrunch.